Do you believe in blood over everything, or not anymore?
I remember that Friday morning in vivid detail, the kind of ordinary autumn day in suburban Ohio where the sunlight slanted through the half-drawn blinds of my kitchen window, casting long shadows across the granite countertop that I had installed myself during one of those weekend renovation marathons after inheriting the old Victorian house from Dad 2 years earlier. The same house where Tom and I grew up amid the creaks of wooden floors and the distant hum of the steel mill that once employed half the town before it shuttered and left families like ours scrambling for stability in a world that seemed to favor the lucky over the hardworking. My coffee mug, still warm from the pot I brewed at dawn before heading to the office for a full day of showing properties to prospective buyers who always haggled over square footage as if every inch determined their future happiness, sat steaming beside my phone when it buzzed insistently with an incoming call from Tom, my older brother whose voice carried that familiar gravelly edge honed from years of chain-smoking cheap cigarettes and nursing grudges in dimly lit bars where old mill workers swapped stories of better times. And without any preamble or small talk about how Mom was faring in her assisted living facility, he launched straight into his announcement that he and his girlfriend Carla were packing up their lives and moving into the house that very afternoon because Evelyn, our mother with her increasingly foggy memory from the early stages of dementia, had assured him it was perfectly fine and that family should stick together in tough times just like we did when Dad's health started failing and the medical bills piled up faster than the snowdrifts outside our childhood home. I listened to his words tumbling out with that casual confidence he always wielded like a shield against accountability, picturing his face with its perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and the lines etched deep from decisions that led him from steady mechanic jobs to sporadic gigs that barely covered his rent. And even though a knot of irritation tightened in my stomach because I had poured every spare cent from my real estate commissions into transforming that rundown property into a secure haven with 2 rental units that generated enough income to keep me afloat, after my divorce left me starting over at 48 without the safety net most women my age still clung to, I forced a smile into my voice and replied that it sounded like a wonderful idea, all the while my free hand already swiping open the security app on my phone, the one I invested in after a string of neighborhood break-ins made the local news and reminded me how vulnerable single women could be in these quiet streets where everyone knew your business, but no one intervened until it was too late. Tom chuckled on the other end, that easygoing laugh that masked his history of borrowing money he never repaid and vanishing for months at a time, promising that we would catch up over dinner once they settled in and reminisce about the good old days when the house echoed with our laughter instead of the silence I had grown accustomed to since moving back in to oversee the renovations that included reinforced doors, motion-activated lights, and cameras hidden in the eaves like watchful guardians ensuring that the legacy Dad left me remained mine alone to protect against opportunists who saw family ties as an open invitation to freeload. As the call ended and I slipped the phone into my purse before locking up the house with its fresh coat of sage green paint that blended seamlessly with the maple trees lining the driveway. Trees Dad planted decades ago as a symbol of roots in a town where jobs came and went like seasons. I drove to my office downtown, navigating the familiar potholes on Elm Street while my mind raced ahead to the potential chaos of Tom's intrusion, knowing full well that his idea of temporary had stretched into years during past crises like the time he crashed on our cousin's couch for 6 months after losing yet another job to his unreliable habits. And by the time I wrapped up a frustrating afternoon showing a cookie-cutter colonial to a couple who second-guessed every feature from the outdated fixtures to the fenced backyard, the sun had dipped low enough to paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, prompting me to check the app one last time from the parking lot where my reliable Honda Accord idled with the engine running against the encroaching chill. That's when the notification flashed across the screen like a warning shot, motion detected at the front gate. Trespass logged automatically with a timestamp that aligned perfectly with Tom's promised arrival, but came 5 minutes early as if he intended to catch me off guard before I could reinforce my boundaries. And I zoomed in on the live feed to see his battered Ford pickup rumbling up the gravel drive, Carla stepping out with an armful of Mismatched duffel bags that spoke of a life packed hastily from one motel to the next, while Tom approached the reinforced gate with a determined stride. Fumbling with a set of lockpicks that glinted in the fading light and betrayed his familiarity with shortcuts learned from less savory associates during his down-and-out phases. They crossed the threshold onto the porch without hesitation, peering through the lace curtains I hung last spring to add a touch of hominess to the rental unit's entrance. Completely unaware of the high-definition cameras capturing every move from multiple angles and uploading the footage to my secure cloud account in real time, and in that moment of calculated calm, I activated the first layer of my defense system, the one I programmed with a mix of practicality and a dash of petty satisfaction after reading online forums filled with stories from women like me who dealt with entitled exes or relatives testing their limits. A deep, authoritative voice emanated from the hidden outdoor speakers, welcoming the intruders to the property owned solely by Sarah Jenkins and demanding they state their legitimate business or prepare for immediate legal action, including eviction notices and potential criminal charges for unauthorized entry, followed seamlessly by a snippet of upbeat circus music that I had looped in for ironic effect, evoking the absurdity of their presumptuous adventure and causing Tom to jolt backward, as if electrocuted, his toolbox clattering to the wooden planks while Carla's bag slipped from her grasp, scattering clothes and toiletries across the mat in a comical disarray that would have made me laugh outright if the underlying tension hadn't knotted my shoulders so tightly. They retreated to the truck in hasty confusion, Tom's face a mask of flustered indignation that I could almost hear in the muttered curses picked up by the audio feed, but the small triumph of that automated rebuke faded quickly as I merged onto the highway toward home, the app's confirmation email pinging with details of the log already forwarded to my records and ready for any escalation. Yet just as the adrenaline began to ebb, another alert pierced the quiet of my car. Motion in the backyard perimeter. The rear camera revealing a shadowy figure in a dark hoodie slipping through a gap in the fence slats near the detached garage where I stored not only the lawnmower and gardening tools, but also a locked cash box containing emergency funds, saved from lean months when real estate sales slowed to a trickle and every commission felt like a lifeline. This intruder moved with deliberate stealth, unlike Tom's blundering approach, heading straight for the garage door as if guided by insider knowledge of the layout that only family would possess, and before I could process the implications, the integrated siren system activated with a deafening wail that reverberated through the neighborhood, strobing red and blue lights illuminating the encroaching dusk like a scene from one of those late-night police procedurals that captivated audiences with their blend of domestic drama and high-stakes pursuit, leaving me to accelerate through the twilight with my heart pounding against my ribs and a whirlwind of questions swirling in my mind about who Tom might have enlisted in this brazen scheme and whether Mom's vague endorsement over the phone earlier that week, her voice wavering between clarity and confusion, had unwittingly set this invasion in motion, or if deeper family secrets were unraveling faster than I could secure the doors. Pulling up to the house that evening amid the flashing lights of the sheriff's cruiser parked at the curb felt like stepping into one of those tense neighborhood dramas that unfold quietly in suburbia, where everyone pretends to mind their own business while peeking through curtains to gather the latest gossip for the next block party, the deputies methodically sweeping the garage area with their heavy-duty flashlights, cutting through the gathering twilight as if searching for clues in a puzzle that hit too close to home for comfort, and I hurried over with my realtor badge clipped to my jacket pocket more out of habit than necessity, since it sometimes lent an air of authority in situations where family matters spilled over into official territory. Explaining the setup to Deputy Ramirez, who listened with the patient nod of someone who had mediated countless sibling squabbles disguised as property disputes in this county where inheritances often unearthed grudges buried deeper than the foundations of the old farmhouses dotting the landscape. Tom and Carla had vanished by the time the authorities arrived on scene, their truck long gone down the winding road that led toward the cheaper side of town where motels offered weekly rates for folks like them drifting between temporary fixes. But the deputies had flushed out the hooded intruder who fled into the thicket bordering the old rail trail, now overgrown with weeds since the train stopped running decades ago after the economy shifted and left so many men like Dad wondering how to pivot from factory lines to service jobs that paid half as much, leaving behind only a discarded crowbar bent from forceful prying and a single leather work glove too slender for Tom's calloused hands that spoke more to a hired hand or perhaps Carla's involvement in the scheme than any solo effort on his part. And Ramirez jotted notes on his pad suggesting I upgrade the fencing around the perimeter and consider a visible camera sign to deter casual opportunists while assuring me that the incident report would serve as a solid paper trail if things escalated further into what sounded like classic family boundary testing gone awry. Once the cruiser pulled away with its taillights fading into the night, I stepped inside the house where the familiar scent of polished oak floors and the faint vanilla from the candles I lit during showings wrapped around me like a comforting blanket against the chill seeping through the cracks, pouring myself a modest glass of Merlot from the bottle chilling in the fridge that I kept for unwinding after days filled with optimistic buyers who backed out at the inspection phase and settled at the kitchen island to initiate a video call with Tom, figuring it was better to confront the issue head-on through screens rather than letting resentment fester like the unmowed lawn after a rainy week. Since arguing in person often devolved into the same circular blame game we had played since our teens when he accused me of always currying favor with Dad by handling the chores he dodged to hang out with his buddies at the arcade. He answered after several rings with his face appearing flushed and disheveled in the dim light of what looked like a roadside motel room cluttered with fast food wrappers and an open laptop displaying spreadsheets that hinted at financial juggling acts far more precarious than the casual debts he admitted to over family holidays, claiming the whole backyard episode was a mix-up with a neighbor kid cutting through the yard as a shortcut, unaware of the heightened alerts I had activated earlier that day. But his eyes shifted sideways in that telltale way they did whenever he stretched the truth during our childhood games of hide-and-seek, where he would deny hiding the last cookie even with crumbs on his shirt. And I pressed him on the details, asking why he and Carla had shown up unannounced and attempted to force entry when a simple text could have prompted a civil discussion about boundaries and the realities of the house serving as my primary income source through those rental units I had poured sweat equity into refurbishing after the divorce left me starting over at 48 with nothing but determination and a toolbox borrowed from the hardware store. The conversation heated up as Tom countered by pulling Mom into the narrative over speakerphone from her assisted living room, where her voice emerged soft and wavering like echoes from a distant memory, affirming in her muddled recollection that she had indeed encouraged him to use the house as a base since it stood empty most days while I jetted around to open houses and networking events. Her words laced with that affectionate bias toward her only son that had always tilted the family scales, even when I was the one driving her to appointments and sorting through the paperwork for her Social Security benefits. And hearing her confusion over the line twisted something deep inside me, reminding me of how dementia chipped away at the woman who once balanced the books with precision during Dad's long shifts, now leaving her susceptible to Tom's embellished stories about needing a fresh start away from the stresses of his unemployment line that snaked longer each month in this post-recession haze affecting so many middle-aged workers in the Midwest. Subtle clues emerged during the call as the camera panned briefly to a pile of unopened envelopes on the nightstand behind him bearing the logos of collection agencies and banks that I recognized from my own brushes with financial tightropes after the market crash wiped out half my listings, suggesting his motives ran deeper than mere sibling reconnection into a desperate bid to offload burdens onto the property that represented my hard-won stability, and we bantered back and forth with me, injecting a wry comment about how his idea of helping around the house probably meant crashing on the couch rent-free while I footed the utilities, like the time he borrowed my car for a week and returned it with an empty tank and a dent from who knows where, lightening the mood just enough to mask the growing unease that this wasn't ending with a handshake over coffee. As the call wrapped with Tom promising to respect the space if I verified things directly with Mom in person the following day, Another alert pinged softly from the app indicating tampering at the side gate where the feed captured his truck idling just beyond the property line before accelerating away into the darkness, prompting me to engage the remote locking sequence that sealed the perimeter with a series of electronic clicks audible even from my vantage point inside, and for good measure I queued up a custom voice prank looping a distorted clip of Dad's old voicemail from years back edited to sound like a stern warning about uninvited guests facing the full wrath of the law if they persisted in their foolishness. The audio blasting intermittently through the boundary speakers to echo across the yard like a ghostly reminder of consequences. Imagining Tom's startled reaction as he drove off nursing his bruised ego and perhaps a dash of that old sibling rivalry turned petty payback. That left me chuckling softly into my wine glass, despite the knot of anticipation tightening in my stomach. Sleep proved elusive that night with the house settling around me in its usual symphony of creaks and whispers from the wind rustling the leaves outside. But around 2 in the morning the app shattered the quiet with an urgent chime signaling motion at the master bedroom window, where the exterior camera framed a shadowy silhouette pressing close to the glass with deliberate intent. The figure's outline blurred by the condensation from their breath, but familiar enough in posture to send a chill racing along my spine as I fumbled for the bedside lamp, heart pounding with the realization that words and warnings might not suffice against whatever resolve had driven this escalation into the dead of night. Snapping on the bedside lamp that cast a harsh glow across the room revealing the empty yard beyond the fogged window where the silhouette had vanished into the underbrush like a fleeting nightmare dissolving under morning light. I lay there for a moment with my breath coming in shallow bursts that matched the erratic beeping of the security panel on the wall before forcing myself to rise and methodically review the footage on my tablet, the high-resolution clip showing the figure retreating with hurried steps that suggested familiarity with the terrain around the property from years of family barbecues and holiday gatherings where Tom would wander off to smoke or brood over perceived slights. But the hoodie and obscured face left just enough ambiguity to fuel the paranoia that had been simmering since his call earlier that week, prompting me to reinforce the window locks with the extra deadbolts I kept in the hall closet for such contingencies, while questioning whether this was his doing or a random prowler drawn by the earlier sirens that might have advertised vulnerability rather than strength in a neighborhood where whispers of economic strain led to desperate measures among folks scraping by on fixed incomes and part-time gigs. By the time dawn filtered through the curtains painting the walls in soft grays that reminded me of the overcast mornings when Dad would head out to the mill with his lunch pail swinging from one hand, I had composed myself enough to brew a strong pot of coffee and plot my next move, deciding that a direct visit to Mom at the assisted living facility on the outskirts of town was essential to clarify her stance amid the confusion Tom had sown with his selective retellings of conversations that bent to suit his narrative of entitlement. So I dressed in practical jeans and a sweater layered against the crisp autumn air that carried hints of wood smoke from neighboring chimneys where families like ours once gathered for potlucks now reduced to occasional texts checking in on one another's fading prospects, and drove the familiar route past the strip malls shuttered since the recession with their faded signs promising bargains that never materialized, arriving at the facility where the lobby hummed with the low chatter of residents shuffling toward breakfast in slippers worn thin from endless laps around the carpeted hallways. Evelyn spotted me from her armchair by the sunlit window, where she often sat knitting scarves that accumulated in a basket without ever finding recipients, her eyes lighting up with a spark of recognition that warmed me more than the tepid tea we shared in the common room overlooking the manicured gardens designed to evoke serenity for minds adrift in fog. And as we settled into the wicker chairs with their cushions sagging under years of use, I gently steered the conversation toward Tom's recent overtures about the house, watching her expression shift from fond reminiscence to a furrowed brow that creased lines deepened by the progression of her condition, which made days blend like watercolors left too long in the rain. And she began recounting a visit from him just weeks prior where he arrived bearing a bouquet of wilting daisies and a sheaf of papers he claimed were from Dad's estate lawyer outlining shared rights to the property that she had supposedly endorsed in a moment of clarity after one of her therapy sessions focused on family reconciliation. Her account unfolded haltingly at first, but gained momentum as fragments of memory surfaced, describing how Tom had read aloud from what he presented as an addendum to the will, mentioning provisions for adult children in need during hardships like the ones he faced after his latest layoff from the garage, where back injuries piled up faster than unpaid bills. But as she mimicked his animated gestures and reassuring tone that painted me as overly protective to the point of exclusion, a nagging inconsistency emerged in her pause-filled narrative about the letter's details that didn't align with the crisp document I had filed away in my safe deposit box at the bank downtown, prompting me to pull out my phone and show her a photo of the actual will where Dad's intentions were spelled out plainly in favor of the child who had shouldered the caregiving load without complaint. Her reaction a mix of dawning confusion and quiet indignation that he might have forged or embellished the permission slip to exploit her vulnerability in those hazy afternoons when staff encouraged light reading to stimulate recall. That revelation hit like a cold splash, confirming the manipulations I had suspected from his evasive dodges during our video call the night before, fueling a resolve to unearth more evidence as I hugged her goodbye with promises of bringing her favorite lemon bars from the bakery on Main Street next time, and drove straight to the county clerk's office in the squat brick building that housed records yellowing with age, like forgotten diaries, spending the afternoon poring over microfiche reels and digital archives under the hum of fluorescent lights that buzzed like persistent doubts, discovering not only Tom's recent unauthorized query into the deed history, but also a scanned copy of a dubious affidavit he had filed pro se claiming verbal inheritance rights based on Mom's alleged consent. The forgery subtle in its phrasing, but glaring to someone versed in real estate legalese from closing deals where every comma could cost thousands in a market volatile as Lake Erie's moods. Returning home as the sun arced toward evening, casting elongated shadows across the lawn that needed mowing before the first frost nipped at the edges, I busied myself fortifying the entry points with fresh caulk around the frames and testing the decoy sensors I had integrated into the system after a workshop on home defense at the community center, where retirees swapped tips on everything from alarm brands to neighborhood watch rotations. But the app interrupted my tasks with a live alert from the front drive, where Tom's truck rolled up boldly under the guise of dusk, him striding to the door with the same manila envelope clutched like a talisman and pounding insistently until the intercom crackled to life with my voice inquiring about his persistent disregard for boundaries after the previous night's intrusion that left more questions than resolutions. He thrust the papers toward the camera lens, insisting they proved his legal foothold through Mom's documented approval, twisted to include fabricated endorsements that I could see peeking from the edges. His argument laced with pleas about family solidarity in tough times when jobs vanished like smoke from the factories that once anchored our town, but rather than engage in verbal sparring that would only embolden his bluster, I activated the decoy protocol designed to unmask such deceptions by projecting a holographic overlay on the porch scanner, displaying an instant verification scan that highlighted the documents as inauthentic, with red flags popping up like error messages on a faulty appraisal report, simultaneously forwarding a sanitized summary of the discrepancies to his email with a CC to the family group chat that included aunts who doted on him but valued honesty above blind loyalty. The witty exposure leaving him stammering excuses as he retreated to his vehicle with the envelope crumpled in frustration, while I observed from the living room window, suppressing a chuckle at how his house of cards teetered on the brink of collapse without me uttering a single threat. The small victory lingered like the aftertaste of victory wine savored in moderation, but it dissolved into sharper tension when my phone vibrated with an incoming call from an unidentified number displaying a local area code that I answered cautiously amid the quiet settling over the house. The gravelly voice on the other end introducing themselves vaguely as a concerned party with insider knowledge on Tom's dealings that could upend the entire standoff if I was willing to listen closely to what they had uncovered in the underbelly of his so-called fresh start. The unidentified caller's gravelly tone lingered in my ear long after I hung up, with a cautious promise to meet at a public spot the next day if their information panned out against Tom's escalating intrusions that had turned our family dynamic into a tangled web of half-truths and desperate grasps for stability in a life where middle-aged setbacks like job losses and mounting bills eroded the foundations most folks assumed would hold firm through retirement, leaving me to pace the living room. That night, under the soft hum of the ceiling fans stirring air scented with the lavender diffuser I used to mask the faint mustiness of old woodwork, pondering whether this anonymous tipster was a genuine ally from Tom's periphery or just another layer of complication designed to unsettle my resolve in defending the property that represented not only financial security, but also the last tangible link to Dad's legacy of hard work amid the Rust Belt decline that reshaped our town from bustling industry to quiet desperation. Morning brought a barrage of texts from the family group chat that Tom had commandeered overnight, his messages painting me as the unyielding gatekeeper hoarding Mom's inheritance while he suffered in motels with Carla scraping by on odd jobs that barely covered gas for his truck, rallying aunts and uncles with emotional appeals about honoring blood ties in tough times when everyone from cousins to second cousins chimed in with memories of shared holidays around the very dining table now. Covered in staging linens for my rental showings, their virtual support swelling like a tide that forced me into a dilemma where backing down felt like betraying my independence forged through divorce proceedings and late-night budgeting sessions. Yet pushing back risked fracturing the fragile network of relatives who gathered sporadically for potlucks and funerals to remind themselves that family endured beyond the daily grind of mortgages and medical copays. I agreed to the proposed sit-down at the corner diner on Main Street where the booths bore the scars of countless negotiations from piecing together community events to hashing out estate matters after losses that hit too soon. Arriving early to claim a spot by the window overlooking the street where leaves skittered in gusts hinting at winter's approach and the economy's chill that kept potential homebuyers sidelined in their current setups, and when Tom slid in across from me with Carla at his side looking more composed in a borrowed jacket that hung loose on her frame, he launched into his case armed with printouts of old photos capturing us as kids on the porch swings and redacted bank statements implying catastrophe if he didn't secure a foothold soon. His narrative weaving Mom's supposed endorsements into a tapestry of entitlement that had the relatives nodding along via the tablet propped between coffee mugs steaming with the diner's robust brew. The tension thickened as he dialed Mom on speakerphone expecting her to echo his version of events, but her voice emerged unexpectedly clear and measured from one of those rare lucid intervals that pierced her fog like sunlight through clouds, contradicting his claims outright by recounting how she had firmly advised him during their last in-person chat to respect my boundaries on the house, since I had invested the sweat and savings to maintain it as a viable asset rather than letting it decay into another family burden like the cabin up north that sat vacant after Dad's passing. Her words slicing through the air with the precision of the woman who once managed household finances through lean years when mill overtime vanished and side hustles became necessities. Leaving Tom fumbling his phone as the chat erupted with questions and the waitresses paused mid-order to eavesdrop on what sounded like a soap opera unfolding over hash browns and omelets. That twist hung in the greasy air like unspoken accusations, exposing Tom's selective memory as a tool for manipulation while hinting at deeper sabotage when he leaned in whispering threats about digging up dirt on my real estate dealings to sway the relatives toward his side. His eyes flicking to Carla, who nodded subtly in a way that suggested coordinated efforts beyond mere support, and as the meeting dissolved into awkward goodbyes with promises of cooling off before holiday tensions peaked, I retreated home to the attic where dust motes danced in the slanted light filtering through the gable window, sifting through boxes of Dad's letters that revealed his quiet concerns over Tom's impulsive choices from gambling flings in younger days to recent loan entanglements that could drag the family name through courts if not checked, arming me with the insight to craft a counterstroke by setting up a dummy email chain from a fabricated legal firm posing as an impartial mediator. The messages detailing a review of estate assets that would penalize disputes with frozen funds and liens on personal vehicles like Tom's truck if cooperation faltered. Sending the bait to the group chat with Tom CC'd watched him unravel in real time through frantic replies denying involvement and demanding clarifications that only amplified the backfire as relatives bombarded him with calls questioning his role in stirring the pot. The witty misdirection planting seeds of doubt without direct confrontation, and leaving me to rake the fallen leaves in the yard that afternoon with a satisfied smirk at how his alliance cracked under the weight of his own inconsistencies. But the growing threats materialized subtly in a faint scratch along the garage door panel that the camera hadn't captured clearly, and a suspicious tire track in the soft earth near the fence suggesting reconnaissance rather than random vandalism in a neighborhood where such hints often preceded bolder moves from those cornered by circumstances. Evening wrapped the house in quiet vigilance as I monitored the feeds over a simple dinner of reheated lasagna from the freezer stocked during bulk shopping runs to stretch the grocery budget. But around midnight the sirens pierced the stillness once more with an alert showing the front door not just approached, but forced ajar by a shadowed figure whose deliberate movements inside the entryway toward the living room drawers carried the weight of personal vendetta. My hands trembling on the wheel as I sped back from an impromptu evening walk to clear my head, the realization dawning that this breach crossed from familial friction into outright invasion, demanding a reckoning that blurred the lines between protection and provocation. Speeding through the dimly lit streets with the dashboard clock ticking past midnight like a countdown to confrontation in a life already fraught with too many unresolved chapters, from divorces to inheritances that tested the bonds of blood thinner than the ink on legal documents. I gripped the steering wheel until my fingers ached against the worn leather that still bore faint scents of the air freshener I hung after long days showing properties to families dreaming of roots, while I wondered if my own had tangled beyond untangling, the security app's feed updating relentlessly on my phone mount to reveal the intruder, Tom, unmistakably in his familiar denim jacket now illuminated by the interior motion lights. Methodically rifling through the living room desk drawers where I kept not just the mundane bills and client notes, but also the sentimental keepsakes like Mom's old recipe cards and Dad's faded fishing license that symbolized the stability he had squandered through choices that led him here in the dead of night. His movements cautious yet desperate, as if weighing each paper for leverage in a standoff that had evolved from sibling banter into this shadowy invasion, blurring the lines between desperation and outright theft in a neighborhood where such acts often stemmed from the quiet erosions of middle-class security eroded by layoffs and rising costs. Pulling into the driveway with tires crunching over gravel that seemed louder in the charged silence broken only by the wailing sirens I had programmed to escalate automatically upon breach, I killed the engine and approached the front door ajar like an invitation laced with peril, the tear gas canister in the study deploying with a hiss that filled the air with acrid clouds visible through the open window as Tom stumbled out coughing and blinded, his broad frame collapsing onto the porch steps, where he raised hands in a gesture of surrender that carried more the weight of a cornered animal than genuine remorse after years of coasting on family goodwill, while I built walls literal and figurative to safeguard the future he treated as an afterthought. And we faced off under the floodlights that bathed us in stark relief against the night sky dotted with stars, indifferent to the dramas unfolding below in this slice of suburban Ohio, where everyone carried invisible burdens from past mistakes like echoes in empty garages. His coughs subsided into ragged breaths as he wiped streaming eyes with a sleeve stained from whatever grime his recent endeavors had accumulated, and I demanded answers in a voice honed from negotiating tough deals where emotions simmered beneath professional calm, pressing him on what had driven him to cross this final threshold after the diner's revelations and the fabricated trust scare that had unraveled his alliances with the relatives now silent in the group chat awaiting the fallout from this blatant overstep. His response tumbling out in fragments that painted a fuller picture of debts spiraling from $10,000 owed to a shadowy lender from his mechanic circles who enforced repayments with veiled threats whispered in parking lots after dark rather than courtroom summons. The house emerging as his desperate gambit to either squat long enough for a quick flip of one rental unit or use the deed as collateral in a plea for leniency that ignored how I had sunk every commission from grueling open houses into renovations that turned the place from liability to lifeline amid my own post-divorce rebuild at an age when peers discussed grandkids instead of solo mortgages. The twist deepened as he fished a crumpled letter from his pocket, its handwriting unmistakably Dad's from the attic trove I had revisited days earlier. dated mere weeks before his fatal heart attack and addressed ambiguously to both children, outlining a heartfelt intent for the property to serve as a safety net for whoever faltered first in life's unpredictable currents. A nuance the estate lawyer had streamlined into formal terms favoring the caretaker to avert disputes, but now surfacing to muddy the moral waters with questions about whether entitlement or necessity justified his breach. And in that revelation, Mom's lucid diner words resonated anew, suggesting her endorsements might have stemmed from a deeper wish for reconciliation buried under dementia's veil rather than outright permission for his takeover, leaving me to grapple with the ambiguity of family loyalties stretched thin by circumstances that pitted self-preservation against the pull of shared history in a culture where middle-aged Americans navigated similar tightropes between duty and survival, with wry humor masking the ache. Seizing the moment amid his deflating posture and the distant wail of approaching sirens drawing from the automated dispatch, I triggered the culminating trap woven through the security logs that instantaneously compiled footage, timestamps, and audio snippets into a comprehensive report forwarded to the sheriff's office with embedded metadata linking his actions to prior alerts, while a pre-scheduled restraining order drafted with my realtor attorney popped into his inbox, complete with digital signatures and a poignant audio attachment of Mom's recorded plea from a clear-headed therapy session urging him to stand on his own rather than lean on the foundations others built. The tech-legal snare closing around him with the precision of a well-staged closing argument that handcuffed his mobility without my direct involvement beyond the app's impartial execution. Watching as realization dawned in his reddened eyes, and he muttered fragmented apologies about starting fresh elsewhere with Carla's truck rumbling at the curb, ready for a hasty exit that carried him into uncertainty, while deputies arrived to document the scene with flashlights sweeping the porch like judgments deferred. As the official lights faded and the house settled back into watchful quiet under my renewed locks and reinforced resolve, I poured a final glass of Merlot in the kitchen, where morning would bring the cleanup of scattered papers and the calls from relatives dissecting the night's events. A wave of satisfaction washing over me at the witty orchestration that delivered payback without descending into chaos, yet tempered by lingering shadows of doubt. Had Dad's letter truly shifted the ethical ground beneath my defenses, or was Tom's plight just another chapter in a pattern of excuses that excused nothing in the end? And what unspoken wishes did Mom harbor in her clearer moments about a family mended rather than divided by deeds and apps that promised security, but isolated in their vigilance, leaving me to toast alone to victories bittersweet and questions that echoed unanswered into the night like the creak of settling beams in a home forever changed?